ANC's National Working Committee is due to meet tomorrow, Monday. We're expecting to hear more details about the case involving suspended Secretary-General Ace Magashule. Earlier this week, the national ANC office bearers decided to oppose Magashule's court challenge of his suspension. To discuss this and other political stories making headlines this week, we can bring in Sanusha Naidu. She is a political analyst and senior researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Sanusha, always great to chat to you. So we're reading today in the City Press that some of Magashule's backers, in fact, in the ANC are saying he should apologize to avoid fighting too many battles on too many fronts. Is that good advice at this point?
Good evening, Thembekile, and to the viewers. I think it's definitely an indication by those sections of Ace Magashule's support base to say that it does weaken him in a bit. It does kind of not enable him to be able to have a more strengthened kind of offensive strategy towards what he's trying to achieve. Firstly, to deal with the whole step-aside rule, but also in terms of the legality and the constitutionality of it. And of course, you know, the question is, was he rash in the way that he reacted to his own letter of suspension with issuing his counter letter of suspension against President Ramaphosa? So it does seem to indicate that the situation is not as cohesive as perhaps the suspended Secretary General thinks it is, that he may not have the kind of arsenal that he needs to go into this battle. And so perhaps the advice is pick your battles and choose them wisely in terms of your strategic offensive.
But would he not appear weak to some of his supporters if he indeed yields to the ANC and does apologize?
Well, you know, that's the point. I mean, that's the gamble that he took, thinking that perhaps the way he came out guns blazing, he would have galvanized and shown his strengthened hand. Now, is this a person who is essentially wounded and is just kind of, you know, picking and going forward and trying to hope that using the offensive strategy that he would weaken his opponents in the party, and in particular the faction of Ramaphosa? But I think at the end of the day, perhaps he didn't really concisely think about how this would go forward. Yes, indeed, he runs the risk. He runs the risk of essentially coming out as weakened. He basically runs the risk of saying, well, you know what, this was a lot of issues that I took on, and basically I have not necessarily thought about it strategically and in a much more cohesive manner. It doesn't bode well for him if we are to believe these reports that there are sections in his support base that are saying, you know what, go ahead, apologize, but then maybe concentrate on the bigger prize here, and that is to try and get this whole process around an early elective conference, to try and, you know, disarm and destabilize your opposing faction. Maybe that's the bigger question here.
And, you know, Sanusha, just reading, in fact, earlier today, J.C. Duarte making comments about cult politics, cult leadership in the ANC, which she admits is an issue that has lasted for years or gone on for years in the African National Congress. Is it too late to root that out?
No, I don't think it's something it's quite deeply endemic in the party, manifested in such a deep manner that it's going to take a long time to essentially try and excise it out of the party, if that's the right way to go about it. It's very much personality driven. It's very much built around a particular individual, and that becomes the overarching issue. So I think it's going to be a long while before they can eradicate it and purge it from the party as they want to. Perhaps this is the beginning of that, to bring it back to the collective. I think one of the things that what has emerged out of this whole Ace Magashule versus Cyril Ramaphosa battleground is the fact that the reputational risk of the party has just become into a spiraling freefall. People keep talking about, have we reached the tipping point? They've just gone over the tipping point. So I think to a large extent that's essentially what it has to come down to, is how do you build back that kind of collective, community-based, grassroots kind of traction, but not around a personality or a cult organization led by an individual.
Also coming up this week is former President Jacob Zuma expected to go back for the resumption of his trial, or the beginning of his trial in the High Court in Pietermaritzburg. We know the big focus there will be on whether his legal team will be able to successfully push for the recusal of advocate Billy Downer. If that doesn't happen, has Zuma reached the end of the rope, if you will, as far as what he can do to avoid trial?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm no legal expert, and I think, it's a technical question in terms of the affidavit. I think the 140-page affidavit that the former president has issued in terms of whether or not he'll receive a fair hearing based on the fact that he believes that the prosecutor does not have his interests at heart or any kind of fairness in terms of this whole process. So the allegations are quite stinging in that affidavit. The claims that are made in terms of the biasness around the Billy Downer and how that's happening, it's really about the prosecutor then coming out and responding to that. It depends how the judge interprets it, whether he sees this as a kind of rehash of issues that the former president has raised in various in various quarters in terms of whether or not the judicial process is biased towards him. It seems to be a trend and an argument he has been making for a long time, even when he appeared before the Zondo Commission and as well in other court appearances. So he has a gripe with the judiciary system and the way it's applied. He feels that he's being victimized. And more importantly, I think when you read that affidavit and you read snippets of it, he's coming back to the question. I think this is something really important, is that if the judge finds that Mr. Downer does not have the requisite fairness in terms of overseeing this prosecutorial case, then the question would be what Mr. Zuma's lawyers are asking for as further, and that is to acquit him. Now, there is the possibility that the judge may basically have a stay in this, decide not to go further, to give further deliberation. That could prolong his trial, Mr. Zuma's trial. But also, if he rules in favor that there is no basis to Mr. Zuma's claims, then there's also the appeals process. So I think this is, again, a more procrastinated set of issues that are going to come further down the line in terms of how perhaps the legal team and Mr. Zuma and his counsel are possibly envisaging the particular scenarios that can play out for them.
A third issue I wanted to raise with you very quickly before we run out of time, also carried by the News 24 titles today, is about the DA going to court. What it wants to do is to get access to the ANC's cadre deployment documents dating as far back as 2013, because at the heart of it, the DA is arguing that cadre deployment is the root of incompetent and corrupt deployments or officials being sent into government. A noble or futile exercise? What happens after they get those records?
I think it's something that they would do under the basis of the promotion of access of information. They have the right to do that. You can look at that, whether or not the presiding judge sees this as something that needs to be looked at more critically in the context of our constitution and the right to know issues. I think it's something that this is the way the DA will utilize its position as the official opposition, and how they utilize it going forward. I think if they have this case heard before the local government elections, they may use it in a way that will also boost them in terms of their strategy. So I think at the end of the day, it's all around the fact that we need to look at how this links up to the questions of access to information.
Sanusha Naidu, political analyst and senior researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Always good to speak to you, Sanusha. Thank you.